Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you about meeting electricity demand requirements virtually. Now, in November, a report was put out by a company called Grid Strategies. And in that report, basically, they were talking about this growth projection escalation that has happened over time. By 2030, we had originally predicted that we would need about 24 gigawatts of energy growth in demand for energy. This year, when they were projecting out to 2030, that climbed all the way up to 166 gigawatts. So there's this massive increase in demand that keeps getting revised upward and upward over time, really causing concern for a lot of people about, well, how are we going to meet that demand? And so there's a scramble for how we're going to make that happen. Some data center owners, who are really some of the biggest drivers of this demand, they're even looking at purchasing electric utilities or starting their own power plants. Those are all creative solutions to a problem that we all share. Now, there has been a lot of focus over the last several years, perhaps the last 10 or plus years, about environmental issues like climate change. And understandably, in order to deal with that, there has been a turning of backs on fossil fuels for power generation. Let's just take that off of the table. The problem is that it's becoming increasingly clear, even to the climate advocates, that to meet the overwhelming demand over the short term, meaning 10 to 15 years, we're going to need to embrace an all of the above strategy that includes all options. So the four primary options that we can use for solving this huge amount of power demand. One is nuclear. That's finding its way into the news and a strategy at the federal and also at the state levels. They're looking at how can we maybe bring more nuclear generation on. Natural gas has been a preferred fuel source for fossil fueled power plants over the past several decades. And they're going to clearly remain an option on the table. They do burn cleaner than coal. And we also have an abundant supply of natural gas in the United States. So it's really readily available to us. And so that's going to remain an option, even for new power plants that are being built, or even converting coal plants from coal over to natural gas so they can continue to operate. And then, of course, we have renewables as a third option. And the current focus by the Trump administration is to basically eliminate all federal support for all renewable energy production, such as solar and wind. But again, that's counterproductive to the all above strategy. And it ignores the reality that these sources of energy production have now become less expensive and faster to deploy than the traditional fossil fuel power plants. And what I really want to talk to you about is this fourth option that most people are not aware of. It's the virtual option called virtual power plants. The focus of virtual power plants is basically on demand reduction, but also added supply from distributed users. So these would be residential and commercial buildings that are out amongst our communities. And they are opportunities for both supply and demand. Now, I have a class that's devoted to explaining all the nuances of virtual power plants. It's called Shared Energy Solutions with Virtual Power Plants. I'll talk more about that here in just a little bit, but I want to give you an overview, a high-level view of what virtual power plants are. So on the supply side, there's an opportunity to put energy from our homes and our small businesses back into the grid. That could come from PV solar systems. It could be from battery storage systems. It could come from electric vehicles that have batteries. All of those are resources, distributed energy resources in our homes and our businesses that can be putting power back into the grid when there's a need for it. We also, though, can manage the demand side, okay? And so demand would include devices that are connected to the internet that can be managed as part of a collective ecosystem of devices in our homes and our businesses. Some of those devices would be smart thermostats, water heaters, pool pumps, and even the photovoltaic solar batteries and EVs. Those are all part of opportunities for managing demand side. So When demand for electricity is high, and that would be in the middle of a really hot summer day here in Phoenix, Arizona, or on a really freezing cold night in, say, Buffalo, New York, extra energy capacity that's in the batteries, that's in the electric vehicles, or in the middle of the day that's being produced by our PV solar, that can be added into the grid in order to manage a peak in demand that would happen at these extreme times. And so with a virtual power plant that is being managed, we can direct that energy into the grid so that we manage that peak. Likewise, demand can be lowered by raising or lowering thermostats in the summertime or the wintertime. Electric water heaters can be turned on, and battery and EV charging can be paused in the middle of the day in order to reduce demand as well. So there's a supply and there's a demand piece that goes with that. Now, when demand for electricity is low, and that might be in the middle of a warm summer day, not super hot, when everyone's photovoltaic systems kick on homes and businesses. Well, they're providing those systems, they're providing enough power to satisfy the needs for those businesses or homes in the middle of the day. And so what happens is the grid has this sharp decline in demand in the middle of the day. When as soon as the sun comes out. And this is known as the duck curve, where when the sun comes out, all these distributed PV systems, they kick on and they greatly reduce demand in the middle of the day. And there's this huge drop off. Well, traditional power plants, they can't turn on and off like a light switch. And that means that the energy that they continue to produce when demand drops off, it's got to go somewhere. Now, what we can do with a virtual power plant is we can use that energy in order to redirect it into charging batteries or charging the electric vehicle battery. Maybe we can turn pool pumps on or turn water heaters on in order to absorb that extra energy in the middle of the day. And so that's basically how virtual power plants work. They work on managing an ecosystem of all of these distributed energy resources for providing supply when it's needed or soaking up by creating demand when it's needed. And in all of that example that I've given you, we didn't have to build a power plant. We just needed to manage the peak load, which is really what demand is often driven by. It's, well, when we need, so that we never have a blackout, we never have a brownout, we've got to make sure we've got enough capacity to satisfy every condition. That means that you're building a super big amount of supply for just a few hours each year in the winter and the summer, depending on where you are, that we've got to satisfy that. But virtual power plants are so much more efficient way of dealing with that. Now, I do have, again, two classes that I want to share with you. One is a case study that I did a product showcase on for my own solar system. I did that with Icon Power, who installed the system for me recently, but I'm turning that into a standalone class so that I can share my experience from contract and financing all the way through startup of my system, operating my system. But what's interesting is that I'm also going to talk about how I operate that system inside of a virtual power plant. Because my electric utility, APS, they operate their own virtual power plant, and I participate in that. So it's an interesting mix of how you interface with that in order to maximize the efficiency, to me, reduce my costs as much as possible within that virtual power plant. And so I'm going to share all those examples with you. That class as a standalone is going to be offered, I already know, with Green Builder Media in February, on February 4th next year. So keep an eye out for that if you're on our mailing list. And then also, I will teach that class at least one more time next year. And there's also my Shared Energy Solutions with Virtual Power Plant class. That one you don't have to wait until 2026 for. That one's coming up on December 4th, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And you can sign up for that class completely for free at learningedgellc.com. Go to complimentary classes. I'll also put that URL in the notes for today for this video so that you guys can see that. So I look forward to seeing you in one of those two classes in the future. Until then, take care.